This is The Civil Fleet, the podcast focused on the activist-led refugee rescue and support missions across Fortress Europe, with me, Ben Coles. In today's episode, we're going to speak with Jasmine, an activist with Maldusa, an Italian cultural association that supports migrant solidarity efforts and documents border violence. Jasmine is going to tell us about September 12th, when more than 5,000 people arrived on Lampedusa, overwhelming the Mediterranean islands' under-resourced and completely inadequate migrant reception facilities and services. She's also going to tell us how the Italian state has not only completely failed the migrants, but the locals too, and how many of the locals mobilised in solidarity with the new arrivals. So before we get started, as usual, I'd like to remind you that the Civil Fleet is not just a podcast, it's also a news blog with news stories, reports, investigations and more. So if you'd like to find out about that, go to civilfleet.com. You might notice that I've not written anything on there for a while, and I've also not put out a podcast in almost a month. I've had some stuff going on in my personal life, a bit of loss, and work and life has been really busy, so I've not had time to do anything. But in the last few days, I've just done 3 interviews, so we should have a flurry of episodes coming your way soon, so look out for those. And if you would like to support the Civil Fleet, you can help us to continue to platform the amazing people that I'm lucky enough to speak to on here. You can help us out with a small donation to help us cover the really small costs of this. Or you can donate loads if you like. I could do with a new car. Anyway, so if you'd like to help us out, you can go to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. Any donations that you make will be very greatly appreciated. Oh yeah, and if you don't want to do that, then you can share us around. We've got about over 5,500 followers now on Twitter. That's pretty cool. So yeah, share us around, share this episode around. Let's get more people listening to it and more people knowing about the situation in Lampedusa. Right, let's get on with the show. So Jasmine, thank you very much for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So today we're going to talk about the situation on Lampedusa and what has been happening there. I'm really happy to get someone on to talk to us about Lampedusa. A lot's been happening. I haven't been following the situation very closely in the last few weeks. So you'll be catching me up as well as the listeners, which is great. So before we start talking about that, and I believe you also work for an organisation called Maldusa, or volunteer for them, but we'll talk about that in a second. First of all, Jasmine, can you tell us a bit about yourself? How did you get involved in this kind of work? Where are you from? This kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to discuss this. I started in 2019 a bit by chance, collaborating with Mediterranea Saving Humans, because a friend of mine was a skipper and he gave his sailing boat as support of the main ship of Mediterranea. And that's how I found myself, really, like this, in the middle of a rescue operation. But since that moment, I realized that because I was studying anthropology in the master at that time, that I wanted also to continue my studies about this. And so I proposed a PhD about activism at sea and, let's say, ethnography on board. So what happens on board of search and rescue ships. But then I also, so starting from an academic point of view, let's say I started to find myself also much more involved in a more activist way, I would say. And so I also found the necessity to actually get out of the sea and of the emergency, I would say, to understand what is happening after and before the moment of the rescue, that somehow sometimes seems the moment in which people on the move start to exist, but of course it's not like this. And so I really needed to get deeper and understanding in a political way what is happening before and what is happening later. And that's why in the last year I spent most of my time, I would say, in Lampedusa, with this project Maldusa, that is a newborn project actually, spending there a lot of time and trying to create kind of link and facilitating a network of organizations that are already there and doing a great job, but not always communicating the one with the others. And so exactly in this direction, try to facilitate freedom of movement, not only regarding the search and rescue, that of course is fundamental and important, but trying to link it to the other practices that are there, and also to understand the search and rescue cannot be the answer alone, and it's just a small dot, in a wider picture. So that's where I am now, between Lampedusa and around, I would say, the Central Med, I mean.
And so for anyone listening, I should say that Lampedusa is a small island, right? A small island owned by Italy in the middle of, maybe not the middle, but it's in the Mediterranean, right? And it's quite close to Tunisia, I think. But it's quite small, isn't it? It's a small island, right?
Yeah, it's only around 22 kilometers square, and is 117, something like this, miles from Tunisia. So it's actually much closer to Tunisia than to Sicily, for example. And I think that gives an idea. I mean, in the winter, it's about 5,000 inhabitants only. And I think it's also interesting to know that 1 on 5, so around 1,200 more or less, are, let's say, authorities, like forces, or other forces, police, carabinieri, guardia di finanza, coast guard. And so also the balance among the population is a bit tricky. But yeah, so Lampedusa is for sure a very emblematic place that has been made an emblematic place of borders, of the frontiers of Europe. Even if, of course, there is also the claim by the people of Lampedusa that Lampedusa might be also just an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, an island of fishermen, that is what it was. But then the political management of borders and migration made it as a symbol of a political, emotional symbol of migration and borders, but it's also something else somehow.
Is Lampedusa kind of like a tourist town, or is it mainly like a fishing place? Or
it's definitely, in the last 20 years, it's became a tourist island, and for sure also, for example, with the COVID, there was actually increasing of the tourism flow, mainly also from Italy, because it was not possible to go in foreign countries, and so also Italian people discovered Lampedusa somehow. And so for sure, I would say that at the moment, of course, fishing is one of the main activities, but tourism is the other one. And fundamental, most of the activities are related to tourism. So definitely a tourist island, with all the contradiction that you can imagine when on a very small island you can find people arriving on boats and tourists, and all the management is made to not make them encounter themselves, and so to make invisible the people on the move. But that's exactly what collapsed in the last days. So I think we will arrive there.
Yeah, it sounds like it's kind of like an apartheid sort of system, right? You've got white European tourists who arrive there and are welcomed, and then you've mainly black or brown people from Africa coming who are not welcomed, and they try to separate the two, right? This is really good background. Thank you so much for all this, Jasmine. I think you talked a little bit about Maldusa, but can you tell us about the organisation, and what do you have a title there? What do you do for Maldusa?
Yeah, so Maldusa was born officially in September 2022, so 1 year ago, when we opened one station in Lampedusa and one in Palermo. Because the main idea was exactly to try to create this link between the sea, the land, what happens later. And so it was quite fundamental for us to understand what happens in Lampedusa, that is, as we said, a crucial point, And because Maldusa is made of individuals coming from other organizations or network of people in solidarity with people on the move, somehow Lampedusa was always, a name that was heard and known somehow. But then we also realized together that actually we didn't know actually nothing about Lampedusa. And so we said, okay, maybe it can be super important to understand also the issues that are on the island related to the local people on the one hand, but also to understand about procedures and about all these management. How does it work in Lampedusa? Because it seemed a kind of black hole in which you don't really know what happens to the people once that they disembark. They enter in this hotspot, that is the center, reception center, in which they are received for theoretically a few hours, then actually sometimes also for months. But then you were not able to keep the contact with them, no? And so what happens there? And how to try to facilitate the communication between the different organizations who work with migrants and with people on the move, and try to give them information, access to justice, to rights, and etc. But how to create this link, because in Lampedusa seemed to disappear any kind of relation. And so being there, being present there, was a kind of attempt, and we are still trying, absolutely. I mean, we are just in the first step of many, I hope, in trying to create these connections that are made of different relationships with people, with authorities, with people working on the island, people out of the island, other organizations in Europe, but also other organizations in Tunisia or in other countries of Africa that are mainly the country of origins or the countries through which people have their passage. So trying to put everything together to understand in a deeper way what is going on, no? Also to try to get out of this narration of the invasion of Lampedusa, the emergency of Lampedusa, when actually it's very clear that there are very simple and clear political reasons why also in the last days there was this so-called invasion and emergency that was just created by the Italian state, and so I think it's only being there and understanding the small nuances, that the light nuances that are there, that you can really get what is going on. So that was the aim in Lampedusa. But then the station in Palermo in Sicily was also to try to then follow up from Lampedusa. So the first step is, okay, the sea, then Lampedusa, and then what is going on there after that. So people from Lampedusa, as I said, they are usually disembarked from the ships of the authorities. They go in this hotspot. They stay there some hours, some days, some months, it depends. And then they are brought to Sicily, usually with a ferry or with military ships where there are many people. And they are brought to Porto Empedocle in the south of Sicily. And from there, they are separated and brought in the different facilities for reception in Italy. Not only in Sicily, also in other regions. But again, what happens in Porto Empedocle? And how can we try to, again, to follow them, to understand what happens to them and how to support them while they are still moving to their final destination, whatever it is. And so in Palermo, we have an open space that is in the center of Palermo, where there are different communities also of, let's say, local Palermitan communities of people who were previously on the move. So with a migration background of people, mainly we have this Bayefal community, that is a Senegambia community of people who are really participating a lot in the Maldusa project. And of course, we think that it's very important to try to link the different struggles in the city with the people who are involved, because they know much better than us also to how to understand some dynamics, some relations, and how to read the scenario, no? With sometimes very different perspectives that are very enriching a lot any possible reading of the situation. And then finally, we will have our presence at sea, because as I said, the point is exactly the one of connecting land and sea with a boat that will mainly support people on the move, maybe not only, or actually with not the aim directly of doing rescue, but more supporting and escorting people to a safe place. But we are still working on that and thinking what is the best concept. So it's still not there. We are trying to understand what is the best way in this moment also to try to be somehow politically involved at sea, not only with a, let's say, humanitarian perspective, but also trying to challenge a bit the political scenario. That is, of course, changing very fast in the last weeks, months. And so, yeah, we are trying in this moment to assess what might be the best way to be present at sea, and if so. So that's Maldusa. I would say, our slogan is facilitate freedom of movement. So we usually just try to, through micro practices, daily micro practices in Palermo and in Lampedusa, to support people on the move and creating infrastructures for solidarity, I would say.
Yeah, it sounds a really interesting project and a really vital one. Because I think a lot of because I put a lot of attention in the Civil Fleet, the podcast and the blog that I run, puts a lot of emphasis on the crisis, but what happens afterwards is a really interesting thing, and a lot of thing I guess some people don't think about. Or once people have made it to Europe and they're safe, then they have many more problems as well. So it's a great idea to sort of link all these things together. So yeah, that was a really nice background, and we've already talked about Lampedusa and where it is. So let's talk about. Let's move on now to what's been happening, because I think earlier this week or last week, today as we're recording, it's September the 19th, and hopefully I can have the time to make this episode really quick online. But yeah, as of now, it's September the 19th. And so I think, was it September 12th? 5,000 people arrived in about 24 hours. Can you just tell us what happened? What was going on there?
So first of all, I would like to kind of trying to give a small genealogy, because it didn't start 1 week ago. I would say that, I was not there before, but when I started to be in Lampedusa in September 2022, so 1 year ago, already something was changing, because in Lampedusa, until that moment, there were for sure a lot of arrivals, and of course there was also an increasing of arrivals in the last years, but the arrivals were mainly from Libya. There were already some arrivals from Tunisia, but mainly from Libya. Let's say that since October 2022, there was this huge increasing of arrivals from Tunisia of sub-Saharan people. That's because the routes has changed a bit, and so there were people from Libya going to Tunisia, but not only, actually, also because most of the people were coming from Algeria, others were coming by plane to Tunisia and then departing from there. And of course, there was a bit also of the understanding that from Tunisia to Lampedusa is much shorter, and we were also used to the Tunisian small fishing vessel that are wooden boats, quite safe, let's say, even if absolutely not seaworthy for that kind of crowd that sometimes is on board, and without devices for safety. So I'm not saying definitely that they are safe boats, but in comparison with Libya, there was this understanding also in the civil society that from Tunisia was a kind of a safer route. But somehow that has changed completely, because in September, October 2022, with this more and more, bigger and bigger number of people with sub-Saharan origins in Tunisia, these very shitty iron boats started to appear. And I remember very well how afraid we were at the beginning, not only because they are super sharp and so they were destroying the sponsons of the boats trying to help them, but also because it was really, really fast, the moment from when just few, just a few parts of water was going inside, and then in 10 seconds they were sinking. And it was incredible because they were also made in a very different way from the wooden boats, so the reaction was different. And in Lampedusa since October, November, December, I remember that this continuum of arrivals with shipwrecks and dead bodies and people in very bad shape. In January and in February, we had this consideration that it was the first time after years in which also in the winter there were so huge numbers of arrivals, and everyone was so surprised. And I remember that when with the other organizations on the island we were counting the number of arrivals every day we were saying, oh wow, that's more than yesterday, oh wow, that's more than yesterday, and so on. And it was very clear that there was a link with the weather conditions. So as soon as the weather was good, there were so many arrivals. As soon as the weather was bad, the arrivals were usually stopping, even if, of course, there is always someone that is departing at the last moment of the good weather, and so then maybe they found the bad weather and there are shipwrecks. But anyway, the point is that since January, there was this increasing of number. So let's start from there. When in February, the president of Tunisia, Kais Saied, did this speech, this hate speech against specifically black people, Africans, so-called, there was this huge movement in Tunisia of Tunisian people starting to kick out black people from the university, from their house, from their job. And so these so-called black people found themselves with two options mainly: go back to their countries or take the sea. And of course, if they were in Tunisia, maybe there was a good reason to not go back to their country, and they decided to take the sea. Take the sea with these iron boats we are talking about, and since February was very clear, this flow of arrivals that somehow was also inspiring, because there were also very different ways of organizing themselves to reach Italy. Of course, that has caused a reaction from Italy and from our very right-wing government installed in late September 2022. And so after some decrees that were trying to control and minimize the arrivals and trying to block the departures. That was the strategy, exactly as it was in Libya. No? So financing third countries to minimize the departures, and so to not have in front of our eyes the problem, and forcing other countries to take the responsibility of doing something that would be against international law, because you are actually denying to the people the right to ask for asylum. So what happened was that Italy started to give financial help to Tunisia to improve their naval army and the Garde Nationale at land, but also at sea, but also at land. And so they started to do this, like to look for people, no, and to find people and to arrest them and to force them to move from one place to the other to try to avoid them to leave. But that, of course, was not really working, and there are always creative ways to depart if you want to depart, and so people were finding new ways of leaving the coast of Tunisia, unfortunately, in some cases with really bad end. And it's incredible the number of the bodies collected on the beaches of Tunisia, and the ones in Lampedusa as well. And they are only the ones that we found, and we know that there are several that are just missing. But anyway, the point is that it was just an increasing day by day, week by week. And so when, to arrive to today, when 1 week ago there was in one day, in 24 hours, 112, if I'm not wrong, but something like this, boats arriving in Lampedusa for around 5,000 people, in a situation in which there were already thousands of people in Lampedusa, because the hotspot was already full, of course the situation exploded. But so I would like to focus on the fact that, first of all, it's not an invasion. It's not that these numbers were never seen, because in 2016, 2017, 2015, numbers were quite similar actually. But the main difference is that at that point, there were big military ships from Italy doing search and rescue and taking the people to the mainland in Italy and not to Lampedusa. And that's obviously one of the reasons why now we are in this situation, because if it is about the assets of the Coast Guard from Lampedusa doing all these rescues and they have to take them to Lampedusa, you are deliberately creating the emergency. You as an Italian state, deciding to bring all these people together in an island of 22 kilometers square. So in a hotspot that should be, in their understanding, that is supposed to be closed. How can you really have, in a good situation, thousands of people in a place that is supposed to be for 389 people? So you are deciding to create a bomb and to let it explode. That is the only way to read it for me. So of course, considering that thousands of people were already in the hotspot, that was already super overcrowded, with also the people working in the hotspot already exhausted, already in the impossibility of doing their work, if you let other thousands of people arriving, of course, this system will just explode. To be honest, even if this is a situation in which, of course, it was very tense, very tough, and there were people eating the small fruits of some vegetables in the street, that was a very, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it's a shame, no, for a Europe country to have people in this condition. And so, of course, it was a terrible situation in which people were degraded, but I want also to focus on other two aspects. That is, on one hand, that people were finally able to get out of this prison that is the hotspot. Because the hotspot system is supposed to not be closed actually by law, okay? So after 72 hours, people should be able to get out of this hotspot. But in Lampedusa, it's just not working like this. And so people are forced to stay inside, in a prison. Officially, it is a prison. And so for the first time after years, people were actually able to go out and to meet people of Lampedusa, tourists, organizations. And that was incredible. And not only in a way in which, someone said it was a kind of a zoo in which people, like tourists, were looking at the migrants dancing, because there were some already famous images now of migrants dancing the main street of Lampedusa, looking at them as strange animals, That's not the point, because actually these people were deciding to enjoy in a moment in which there was devastation around somehow, and there was this tenacity, this strength, this decision, the agency of the people coming and deciding of enjoying in a very strange situation the presence with other people around them. And that was what caused the second point. So this huge, great, incredible solidarity coming from all the people in Lampedusa. And even if there were also demonstrations by the people of Lampedusa, as it was also in a lot of newspapers and so on, I want to make it clear that no one said anything against migrants. And that was crazy, incredible, beautiful, because there was no one word against migrants. It was, a lot of people were very pissed and very angry against the management of migration, against the state, against the authorities, the presence of the militarization on the island, but not against migrants. And they were actually claiming for the rights of these people and asking for quicker transfer and for better conditions and to actually destroy the hotspot system that is a prison and cannot structurally work.
That's really interesting. Like, there's quite a lot of things I wanted to ask there, and let's start with, because you were just talking about there was a demonstration and the people in Lampedusa were angry at the way that the management of the way that was run. Not angry, they weren't protesting against migrants or the people on the move. What was it? Because I think we'll talk about this in a bit later, but Ursula von der Leyen, who's the president of the European Commission, and Giorgia Meloni, who's Italy's prime minister, they visited the island like last week or this week, soon after, right? What was the reception to them? Like, did they? It seems like they weren't there for very long, but what was the reception like to their visit?
So actually, Giorgia Meloni and Ursula von der Leyen came on Sunday, so it was the 17th, and they stayed, I think, 2 or 3 hours. That, honestly, I really don't know what was that for. They went to the airport, they did this conference press, something like this, and then they did one trip around the island in which they actually met for 1.5 minutes the locals of Lampedusa, and then they went away. So, of course, it was more a way of, how to say, to show their presence, to pretend to give response. Also, the Minister of Interior, Matteo Piantedosi, was present. And in that situation, I feel that the reaction of the people of Lampedusa was, again, quite clear. So they were very angry and they were claiming for the freedom of the island. But I think it was quite interesting also to listen some of them saying, we are invaded, and some journalists asked, okay, but by whom? And they said, from police. We are invaded from police, by police. And so that was the point, And so they were absolutely against, of course, also for their freedom. And I see the importance of respecting and understanding that Lampedusa is an island in which there is no hospital. There is a lot of problems in the infrastructures, and all this attention for migration is not an attention that then is also redirected to the needs of people of Lampedusa being there. So, of course, they are tired, they are exhausted after dozens of years in which all the focus of all the media, politicians, researchers, activists is actually about migration, but nobody really cares about the needs of the people living there, inhabiting the island, not because of the migration itself. And I think it's quite interesting. There was this kind of conversation the last days about the absence or the presence of the state in Lampedusa, because someone was denouncing somehow not the absence of the state about migration control. But that's exactly the opposite. Actually, is exactly the presence, the dysfunctional presence of the state regarding migration policies that is creating this emergency. And on the other hand, yes, the absence of the state regarding the needs of the people of Lampedusa. But so it's a weird mirror somehow, no? In which the absence and the presence, the dysfunctional presence of the state are creating a lot of contradictions and also a lot of different parties somehow, no? And so everyone has a different perspective on this. But I think it's important to say that the same people who were protesting against Meloni, against Ursula von der Leyen, saying that they don't want another hotspot, they don't want more control on migration in the sense of police control, but they want rights for everyone. They want to have their freedom of leaving the island as a fisherman island, as a tourism island, and not only about migration. These people were the same, opening their doors and giving food to the people, inviting them to join for a coffee or to give new clothes or to let them have a shower. So I think it's really important to focus on these in all the contradictions that are there, but to not get it simplified, because otherwise this complexity is lost, and I think actually it's very important and also beautiful somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting. It just reminds me of, like, quite often, particularly in the UK, it tends to be the people that are furthest away from migrants or furthest away from different people are the ones that oppose them. So, like, I guess in Lampedusa, if they're used to people being on their island all the time, if it's a tourist hotspot, then maybe they're more open-minded to it. No, that's really interesting. It is like like a more complicated than the media often makes it out to be. Another thing I wanted to ask is, so this hotspot, is that like a center or a place where people go, right? And you said that I think it was, I'm not sure how much you said it, but it was like it was built for around 300, 400 people, right? But now there's
9, yeah.
and now there's like 7,000 people or something. There's a lot of people there, right? And you said it was created by the Italian state. This emergency that happened this week. Do you think that is due to incompetence, or is it like a planned sort of thing?
So in the spring, I don't remember exactly the week, the day, but the Italian government declared a state of emergency about migration. And in this context, they gave, I would say that it has been a turning point, let's say, for Lampedusa, because, for example, the management of the hotspot changed. And so from the previous management cooperative, Badia Grande, it was changed to the Italian Red Cross administration. And a lot of new transfers were implemented. And so actually, since that moment, the situation of the hotspot has changed quite a lot, because for example, if before there were people staying there normally as 1 month, 2 months, with these quick transfers, that means more assets, ships, flights, whatever, to take away the people from Lampedusa, actually people were staying there much less. Even if, again, there were a lot of exceptions, because still in Italy nothing is really working. There was the problem that where do you put these people? And so, for example, with the vulnerables, the most vulnerables, that is a great contradiction if you think about it, they didn't know where to put them. And so actually the most vulnerable were the ones staying more in the hotspot, because they didn't know where to transfer them. And so if you think about unaccompanied minors, or women with some specific issues, or people with psychiatric health problems, they were the people staying more in the hotspot, even with the Red Cross. But someone might say, okay, so the problem is not about Lampedusa itself, it's also after, so it's a very complex management, of course. But what I think is fundamental is to understand that, first of all, this is just something structural, and it's the hotspot system that cannot work, and that's it. Because even in this way, in which we might also be happy that people were transferred so quickly, actually, for example, it was so quick that actually no one of the human rights that should be respected were respected. And so there were families that were split. And we received a lot of calls of mothers looking for children, and they were split because there was no time to assess that actually that was the mother of the children. So it's incredible to see that even if you try to move to one direction, to make it faster, to make it better, still, that cannot work, unfortunately. And there will be another problem, because unfortunately, and I don't want to be too much utopic, and I don't want to do only a abolitionist discourse, even if I can also find myself aligned on this. But the point is that technically, and about procedures, about structures, the hotspot system cannot work, because it's an emergential plan, and it cannot work with a phenomenon that is something that has to be understood as something that is there, and we have to deal with that, not trying to filter, to label, to categorize who is arriving, this other that is invading us, and we have to protect ourselves. We need to change radically the perspective on this. And so, I mean, I don't think it's about the government being incompetent in organizing the reception facilities in Italy. I think that there is no will to do that. And of course, most of the propaganda of the right-wing parties is made on migration. And so if you find a way that might be absolutely possible to actually encounter these people and not only to manage them, to, for example, rework all the visa procedures, to open the borders, that doesn't necessarily mean to have no rules, but to rethink completely, radically, what does it mean to deserve to arrive in Europe? That is how now it's working. Of course, then how can you claim for the invasion of migrants and win at the elections? You can't. So I don't want to make it too simple, of course. Of course, it's also a very complicated issue. Of course, it's also a European level situation. It's not only about Italy, evidently. And so I don't want to say that it's not responsibility of Italy. Of course it is. But it's also an European responsibility, and there is a European plan of not having a concrete response to that. And that's clear also at sea, no? With all these struggles that NGOs have to have at the moment and in the last years, it's very clear that it's not, no one is really looking for a real solution, no? So, no, I don't think they are not competent, and it's just that they don't want to solve the problem.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I think, particularly in the UK, it feels like it's in their favour, it's in the government's favour, particularly right-wing government's favour, for it to look this bad. So then you'd be like, yeah, we have to do something, you have to vote for us because we'll fix it. And they never fix it. But it's a reason to vote for them if the situation's bad.
Yeah, and I think that's also what Meloni and Piantedosi said on Sunday. In the 10 points they declared, with those also von der Leyen, it's very clear that actually there is no understanding of, or any will of understanding the situation to really create solutions to what is happening at the moment. Because if you say again that the point is to prevent departures, to go against traffickers, clearly you are not trying to solve anything. No, you are just trying to have another scapegoat, and nothing will change again.
So what's happened in the last few days then? So it was like earlier, it was last week when people were on the street and people started partying. I saw that Maldusa had written about, another organisation had written about people who, the locals in Lampedusa were giving food to the migrants, to the people on the move. And there was a lot of solidarity and stuff. But what's kind of happened since then in the last week? Are these other people who arrived still out on the streets and stuff, or what's happening?
So I would say that there were a lot of people in the city center of Lampedusa until Saturday night. That is the night before Giorgia Meloni and Ursula von der Leyen arrived in Lampedusa. On Sunday morning, it seemed to be suddenly another island. Nobody was in the streets anymore. Even if there were still 1,000 and around 900 people, so still a lot. And there were still a lot of arrivals coming and disembarkations, but they were all locked in the hotspot. And so everything was somehow cleaned, and it was quite tough to see authorities during the Saturday night, so the one before their arrival, the Giorgia Meloni and Ursula von der Leyen arrival, also saying to the people, for example, to go to the port, so maybe they could have depart with the ferry, and then to say, no, you have to go to the hotspot, just to try to make them go away from the city center and to lock them again into the hotspot. So it's also lying to them and pretending to have solution for them who were claiming to be for being transferred, and so saying, we will transfer you only if you go in the hotspot, and then of course not doing that. So trying to betray them and to really just try to make it clean for the arrival of the parliamentarians. But anyway, after that, actually, it was quite interesting so far to see that once that Meloni and von der Leyen went away, still there were some people who were somehow allowed to go out and in from the hotspot. It's not totally clear to me if they were actually really allowed to do that or if they climbed it somehow. But anyway, it was something that in the last months and years was not really happening so much. So it was anyway great to see that there were people able to get out of the hotspot, and so just to hang around in the city and maybe just have a coffee. Also because I think it's important also to give back this image that of course there were a lot of people starving and a lot of people in a very bad condition, but there were also a lot of people with euros in their pocket ready to buy a new t-shirt, a new hat, and to seem absolutely the same of a tourist. So also to get out of this victimization of the migrants going in the city asking for some money. It's not only about this, as always, it's more complex. And so it's important, as it was important to focus on this way of enjoying the music, dancing, also the fact that there were people just entering in a restaurant and sitting and ordering something and paying it. And I think it's important to remember these kind of images as the ones of people on the move, like playing soccer, football with some young local people of Lampedusa. And it was great to see this scene that it's incredible for the people who have worked on the island, because it was a extraordinary scene. And so the question is, how would it be if it's normal? What if the hotspot is always open? What if people can just go away and go back when they want, if they need something? I don't know what will happen in the next days. At the moment, there are still a lot of arrivals. Of course, you always move the limit of the maximum, because now after that day there were 112 arrivals. When there are now 40, it seems nothing. But I remember very well when in March it was 40 and we were like, oh, wow, it's a new record. And so also about this, we have to have a good memory of what is happening, and to remember that actually there are still a lot of arrivals, and that the hotspot is still for 389 people, that human rights are still not respected, that the hotspot should not exist, but if it exists, there are different rights that should be implemented, and they are not. And so at least if people could keep going out of the hotspot, that would be great somehow. Also because it's not only about the rights of the people to go out of the hotspot, as it is, but it's also about the kind of visibility they give to their presence. And this fact of this, also it was incredible to see the people of Lampedusa reacting in this very solidarity way, of also the ones that in the last months were so tired and so exhausted of this management that they were also somehow disattached from the issue itself. And in this moment, when you meet the people, when you see them, when you can be with them, you can talk with them, in this encounter, you really find new energies to be in solidarity, and you really recognize something that is very banal, very spontaneous, that is to share something, the moment, football match or a piece of bread, it's the same. So, but of course, it's important also to keep the political motivation to find different solutions. And I think that from Lampedusa was good to claim for quicker transfers, no new hotspots, but instead rather new way of managing the situation itself. And so let's see what happens in the next days, because arrivals are still there. People, it seems, can still go and come, not as before, it's not open, but someone is able to go away. So let's see what will happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hopefully the situation gets better, but I guess it won't. What can you talk a little bit about so Europe's response? Like, we had Meloni and von der Leyen go into Lampedusa for a couple of hours. I think Germany is recently. This has happened in the last few weeks. I've been busy with other stuff and haven't managed to focus on the situation in the last few weeks. But I think Germany has stopped accepting migrants from Italy now. Can you talk a bit about Europe's response not to Lampedusa, but also a little bit kind of wider, like recently, what's been happening?
Yeah, so actually, I have to be honest, I didn't study it very well what is happening about this, but what I know is that for sure, actually, this thing about Germany is actually something that was happening before this thing in Lampedusa. That means that actually the decision was happening at the end of August. And only in the last days was something that became so much public because it was fitting very well as a kind of reaction to what was happening in Lampedusa, and so to claim for this invasion that was so huge that also Germany, that in Italy is considered a country in which there is a good reception, a good welcoming policies, blah blah blah, and so I think it was quite strong in the different newspapers in Italy saying, after this crazy crisis in Lampedusa, France and Germany don't want to accept anyone anymore from Italy. But actually they were not related. No, it was just, of course they are also related, but not to this last episode. It's something that is related to the last month's flows. No, that I think is already important to put focus on this. But anyway, specifically, the part of Germany was more about the Dublin Convention and the fact that actually these pacts are at the moment not really working because there are not so many not repatriation, but not so many people arriving in Germany who arrived before in Italy are actually pulled back to Italy, let's say. And so Germany said something like, okay, so we'll just not take new people in Germany if you don't respect the fact of accepting back the people who don't deserve, let's say, to be in Germany.
Let me just, you mentioned the Dublin Agreement. So if anyone's listening to this podcast for the first time, we've spoken about the Dublin Agreement quite a lot in this podcast. But for anyone who doesn't know what it is, essentially, if someone arrives into Europe, the first country that they get registered in, they're supposed to stay there. So if you get registered in Italy and then make it to Germany or France or something, the police can send you back to Italy, right? That's the Dublin Agreement. I just wanted to mention that in case this is the first time anyone's listening to this podcast. Anyway, sorry. Carry on, Jasmine.
But I think it's more about this, and I think it was just a great moment to get it public somehow, no? And about France, for sure, there was an increasing of police at the borders trying to prevent people to cross. But again, I really would like to focus on this, no? That, if we think also about Tunisia and how many agreements now, no? And memorandum Giorgia Meloni is trying to have, and then look at what happened, I would say that we can only, of course, keeping in mind all the violence of the border, but we can only celebrate how many people reached Europe, even with this kind of agreements. And we have some stories from people arriving from Tunisia to France in 3 days and say, if I would have taken a flight, it might be longer. So I really, I think it's really important to stress also the strength, the tenacity of the people who try whatever they can, and they finally reach the destination they want. Of course, it's not the only page of this story. Of course, there is, again, violence, absolute how to say, ignoring the human rights, and also sometimes going against some constitutional basic rights, and a very structural racism, for sure in Italy, but also in other countries in Europe, and I would say a basic racial way of understanding citizenship and welcoming and reception. But still, I think it's very important also to remember that France and Germany can try to close all their borders, but people will for sure try and find another way to arrive where they want. So I just would like to make it easier and not more difficult, because just studying a bit, we can see that actually every time that we close with a wall, a border, it's not that people stop to cross, they just find another way that usually is more dangerous, usually is more expensive, maybe they will put their life at risk more and more, but somehow they will try. So I think this is important, and we have to put shame of Europe on Europe and on the different countries that in this moment, instead of welcome people, are closing their doors. But I still feel that we don't have only to focus on this, on the emergency, on the invasion, blah, whatever, but more on the spaces of creativity that actually people can put in place.
Absolutely, yeah. And something you know, what you just said there about when you put up a border in one place, pushes people somewhere else, right? There's never like there's a memorandum with Italy. Italy has a memorandum, I think, with Tunisia and with Libya, and it's trying to. It's not just Italy, but the EU, right? It's trying to fund the coast guards there, trying to make it harder for people to cross. But people will keep finding a way. There's so many different routes into Europe. The only way to stop it, if that is your goal, would be to make the reasons people leave obsolete. Stop the reasons why people leave. Right? It's not going to change it. I remember reading a book. I can't remember what it's called. I can see it over there, but I just can't quite see the title. But and it was about the border in the US, between the US and Mexico, and it talks about in the book how the border there, the border walls, because there's not one long border across Texas and Mexico, but where the borders are, where the border isn't is the most dangerous places to cross, and so they've deliberately built the border to funnel people to the most dangerous place, and so they die en route. And this is exactly what is happening with Europe and the Mediterranean, right, and the eastern route into the EU. I'll put a link in the show notes so people listening they can find it. I'll put a link to that book because it's excellent. But yeah, what you said there just reminded me of that. You stop one place, people come somewhere else. Anyway, so in the interest of time, I think, Jasmine, we could keep talking, and I really want to talk more to you. I'm really enjoying this conversation, but in the interest of time, let me get to my last question. Or actually, before that, was there anything you wanted to talk about the Lampedusa situation or the situation in Italy before I get to my last question?
No, please go ahead. I mean, there are so many things, but go ahead with the last questions, please.
So the last question is the horrible question I like to ask everyone that comes on the podcast, and that's about the future. And I think a lot of people feel quite bleak about the future in many ways and what's going. So I'm kind of looking for hope in this answer, if you can. But so what do you think about the future and where we're heading and the situation? How is it going to get better? How do you feel about the future? Basically, is my question in regard to migration.
Yeah. So I think that personally, there was a moment like during this year, or maybe several moments, in which I was very disappointed by the movements, no, by the resistance, so called, because I found that mainly also at sea, sometimes we just repeat some of the dynamics that we are supposed to fight against, and so there is this way of actually like get a kind of appropriation of what is happening at sea, and so this way of saving life with all this, we have to say that I think this white saviorism, that is a very big issue in the search and rescue civil community, and a quite colonial way to understand the Mediterranean Sea and migration and citizenship and reception and welcoming. That I'm not surprised that the institutions are doing so, but I was a bit disappointed that sometimes also in the grassroots social movements, there is something about it. So mainly, I think that for me, that the hope is mainly the one of, first of all, having more and more awareness inside these groups to work on that, and to, I feel that is absolutely normal and okay and human to have contradictions, and so it's very hard to find a good balance between your daily life and the moments in which you are protesting for something or you are claiming for something and you want to have a strong political position. And of course, we have to inhabit these contradictions, but to not give up on these. And so when we talk about solidarity with people on the move, when we talk about different struggles we can put in place, to try to also to tackle, to challenge the inequality that is there, and considering that is not necessarily our struggle, because I'm lucky, I'm privileged, I don't have to fight against borders just for myself. But I think it's very important to always remember that actually now we are privileged in this sense, but we might also be in a different position in another day. And so it becomes somehow also a struggle that is regarding everyone, and to try to put together some struggles that are not only about migration, not only about crossing borders, but against disequalities, against hierarchies, against how to say, a management of the power that is creating more and more disequalities. That's my point. And for these, I feel that actually we have a lot of paths that we can go through. And so I would just wish more awareness for the social movements. But I don't want to be too much pessimistic, actually. I think we can work on that. And starting from inside the communities of the social movements, and then looking also outside. Otherwise, it's very hard to do something with someone else, and you just find yourself to do something for someone else that is very different. And so to really be in solidarity, and not only in assistance or in humanitarian way of creating depth, and so hierarchies, and so inequalities, we have to really to be aware of this and to challenge this. But we can try to do that and to focus on this.
Well, Jasmine, I'm going to have links to Maldusa and your social media and stuff in the episode notes. Can you just tell us, how people can find more about Maldusa?
Yeah, so thanks for this. We have a website that is in English and in Italian, in which we try to update about Lampedusa, about the events that we do in Palermo, the presentations of books or something like this that we organize in both of the stations. But also with some news also about what is happening at sea, and different like statements or communicates about migration, solidarity networks, etc. We have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter page. And so I think the name is Maldusa Project. And I think it's easy to be reached. I hope at one point we will have also a French page, but still it's not there.
Yeah, that would be good. This is what I should have asked at the beginning of the podcast. Actually, the symbol you have, like, it looks like Medusa's head. Is that what's the reason for that?
Yeah, so the idea was there are different meanings. So first of all, actually, Maldusa is a mix of Malta and Lampedusa. Because it was actually a story from alarm phone in which some people on board of a boat in distress were calling alarm phone. And when people of alarm phone asked, where you want to go, where are you going? They said, to Maldusa. And the person of alarm phone said, hey, sorry, Maldusa doesn't exist. Malta or Lampedusa? And they said, no, Maldusa. And so after this conversation, somehow Maldusa was a kind of, utopic place of freedom, utopic place of safety. And we liked the idea of Maldusa as an infrastructure for solidarity. But at the same time, saying Maldusa in Italian is very similar to Medusa. no, that in the mythologic narration. And so the logo is keeping this link somehow. And you can see that the hair of the Medusa is not made of snake, as it is in the mythology, but is made of, we want to say, like vectors, so different roots somehow, that reminds a bit also of the waves, let's see. And also Medusa is a kind of female symbol, and because Maldusa tries to be also a kind of like trying to put together different struggles, there is also a strong part that is try to be also feminist activist group. So we like the idea of having a feminist, a female image. So that was the concept behind, to put together different symbols, but also talking about different roots and movements.
That's really cool. That's a really deep. I really like that. My sisters are, they're both feminists, and they both like. Well, one of them in particular is really into Medusa, and I think it's still. When I saw it, it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Anyway, Jasmine, thanks so much for your time. It was really great to talk to you, and I'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
All right, that was episode 46 of the Civil Fleet. Thank you so much for listening. I really, really enjoy doing these episodes, so thank you so much for listening and sharing this podcast around. Again, thanks so much to Jasmine for coming on the show and talking to us about what was going on in Lampedusa. Really great to speak to her. I need to follow Maldusa more. I followed them a little bit, and I'm going to keep in touch with them and everything that they're up to. So go check them out. I've got links in the show notes to everything that we spoke about in this episode. What else do I need to say at the end of these episodes? Yeah, I've got a couple more episodes in the bank here, so we should have some more interviews out soon, hopefully the next few days before the end of the month. We'll see how that goes. Go to civilfleet.com, check us out, check out the work that's on there. Like I said at the beginning of the show, there's not been much, but there should be some more stuff coming that way soon. And if you'd like to help us out, chuck us a bit of change, then you can do that if you go to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. Chuck us a bit of money, help us to continue to do this, help us to continue to cover our costs of producing the Civil Fleet, which is not much. It's not expensive, but a bit of money helps. Anyway, I will see you on the next episode. Cheers, bye-bye.